welcome to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Mike Roderick, and with me today is Mr. Sean Oriano. How you doing, Sean?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Doing all right? All right. It's Thursday here. We're doing okay. No, we're excited. We've got another great episode coming your way for our Kali Linux series, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at web servers and web applications. You know, these are prime targets for the bad guys, for the hackers, because they're typically our public exposure for most organizations. And as a pen tester, these are the kind of things that we've got to test, right? We've got to figure out how the bad guy's going to try to get in. So we got to be aware of all the tools we can use that we can bring to bear against those kind of things. So Sean, I guess we should probably start out just talking about web servers in general and the way we interact with them normally, the way we our client-server type relationship.
So let's just to make sure again we're all on the same page with what the situation is here. When we talk about web applications, we really want to kind of get a handle on the environment so we can understand the tools and how they're going to be brought to bear, and we can understand what they're expected to do and what they're going to look for. So to get things started, when we talk about a web application, we're talking about something that's getting processed or doing its activity on the web server itself, or on that machine. So when we look at that machine, we have, of course, the operating system plus the web server plus whatever application modules that make that application work sitting on top of that, and all that comes together to be the web application in its simplest form. I mean, I know I may be oversimplifying that, because if you look at some of the more complex web applications, they can have a front end, a middle tier, and a back end, and then those things can all be spread out amongst multiple components. You can have databases brought into bear. You can have all these different things coming into play. But its most basic form is just going to be the operating system with the web server and a web application stacked on top of it. Now, what the web application does is really kind of varied, and that's one of the things that makes this area kind of tough to really just cover everything in a setting like this. We can talk about web applications in general. We definitely are going to take a look at some of the various tools that are available right here in Kali to help you with that. But to really do a full-blown and really usable assessment, you're going to have an understanding of your specific situation and your specific web application. So that's just kind of telling us what we can do, what type of environment we're going into.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different possibilities, right? Different web servers that could be running. I think an IIS, Apache, and I know I'm missing a few there. And then different applications that are running on top of that, custom-made, off-the-shelf products. As you said, they could be multi-tier, your N-tier setups where they've got the data actually resides somewhere else on the network, or it could be a very simple setup, could be a farm, could be load balancing. So there's a lot of different possible configurations when we talk about trying to hit a web server or web application. But then there are some things that are kind of common to the whole, no matter how it's set up, right? It's listening on certain ports. It's got certain things that are open, certain things that it's doing. So there are some commonalities that we can kind of take a look at then.
Yes, and that's kind of some of the stuff we can take a look at here. But yeah, there are going to be things that are going to be unique to each specific environment. But things like cross-site scripting and problems with forms and and all sorts of little things. We even talked about things like session hijacking and stuff like that can be done at the application level, and that means we're talking web servers / web applications. So some of those things will go across the board and be issues with really any technology you get into on the web application side. But there are specifics that really require that you have that fine-grained knowledge or in-depth knowledge of that specific environment. I could sit here and say, well, here is this specific tool targeting SharePoint, but why it's targeting SharePoint, if I don't know every detail about SharePoint and really understand it, it's just a bunch of things on a screen. And it sounds like, well, just learn about SharePoint. Okay, well, I'll say it's easy, just to make it simple, but that would be the easy thing to do. Okay, learn SharePoint. Okay, but that covers one web application. How many different web applications do we have? Just tons of different ones. It's unlike networking, some of these other technologies. Networking, you can configure it many different ways, but there's so much that's carried across and common amongst all of those that yeah, you'll have to figure out different things with that environment, but it's not something that someone that knows networking technology can't just walk into and kind of do an analysis and figure things out. Right. So we do have to keep that in mind. And there's even the programming technologies a lot that come into bear too. You know, if you learn something like SharePoint, fine. But what if someone's customized it, and what if they've brought all that into play? Now that opens up another can of worms that you got to get into. So what we're going to take a look at are the tools that can help you get this information, but you're still going to have do your homework on that side.
Right, and then you got to also think about whether we're using a tool that's targeting the web server itself versus an application that's running on that web server. Because that's going to make web servers have vulnerabilities like IIS itself or Apache itself. Or then it could be, as you're saying, the application that's running on top of that. And then depending on what scripting language they might be using, if they're using one at all, that can change our angle of attack or the tools we use, whether everything's based on PHP, or whether they're using MySQL versus SQL. So a lot of variations, and so it's one of those areas where you really just got to get in and play and try things and do things, and that's where fingerprinting, I think, comes back. A lot of that information that we gathered way back in one of our first phases, our reconnaissance phase, right? That's going to help me in this part because now I know, hopefully, what they're running as an underlying operating system, what version of what web server application they're running, what if they're running IIS or Apache, and what scripting language maybe that they're using, and things like that. All of that can come back into this phase and really help us out, right?
Oh yeah, there's so much of the stuff that's going to come from previous phases are going to be carried over into this. A lot of the tools that we've used, if you have been saving that information, which hopefully if you're doing this in a live environment, that you are indeed saving that or documenting it, because that's going to come back into play big time. And so just make sure when you're doing this live that you're keeping track of all that. No need to go through it and say, oh well, what did I forget? I think there was something that I remember getting before. So now you got to go through all your tests and see where that was. Let's not do that. Let's make sure we're getting everything clearly documented, and just make it a habit.
So when we talk about that client-server relationship that we have with these web servers and these web applications, Sean, we're talking about we're being the client, right? We're consuming a service or using a service. That web server is the server side of that relationship. It's presenting information or providing a service that we're consuming. A lot of times the code is executed on the web server itself, or maybe on an N-tier system behind the web server. Sometimes though, code is executed on the client machine, really depending on how they've got it set up.
Yeah, it can be a mixture of those. You can have stuff being processed, on the server side, and that server can kick out something to the client. The client does another round of processing on its end, and and stuff will be done there. You could also have it when someone submits stuff. I mean, let's say that someone requests something from a web application and it's a form. They get the form, they put stuff to populate that form, they hit submit. There could be a client-side script validating that everything is in the form is there and in the correct format, and if it's not, it doesn't even submit it back up to the server. If it is correct, it goes up to the server, and the server may actually say, I'm going to forward that information because now I have some data I need to store. I'm going to forward that onto a database server sitting someplace else that's going to go ahead and keep that all on file so I can do something with it later on.
Yeah, a lot of times those web designers, I'm not a web designer, but dabbled it in a little bit, but we might try to push some of that execution off onto the client. That just means less work on my server. Other times, it might be things that I don't know what they've got installed, and I could try to put it on their end of things, but they might not have the right, .NET framework, or something like that. So maybe I need to process it on the server side. And like you said, typically you're going to see both going on. Some information being processed on the client end of things before it's presented to that server, like our validation checks and things like that, and then other stuff being processed on that server side. So a couple of different places we can look for vulnerabilities or places that we have to test, right?
Yeah, there's what this is all getting towards is there's so many. There is so many places that vulnerabilities can pop up. And fortunately, what something like Kaylee does is it brings in a bunch of tools that can analyze all these different components. We're just going to start looking at some of the stuff in this first piece we're doing here. We're talking about what web applications are and kind of fleshing them out a bit, trying to give you an overview. Or trying to we're also going to try to impress upon you along the way that we have these tools that can help you find that and go through all these little nooks and crannies. But then there's other stuff that we're not going to get to yet. And that's, for example, the SQL stuff in the back end. What if you have a database there? Those databases are another beast altogether that has to be addressed. And you can't just say that's a web application generically. You just have to say, okay, there's a web application, that's one thing, but that thing can integrate and connect to a database. And so that being, that having the complexity and stuff going on that it does, we have something else we need to address too. So we have to push that off to another section to be able to handle that the right way. So just keep that in mind too. We've got all these different components. These tools should all be helping you keep track of all those little components and test them all. So you really got to keep that one in mind when you're doing it. And that's something. I mean, think about this: is these tools can also be used for someone that's developing these things. There's nothing saying that these tools are limited to just being the person that is a pen tester is going to use that to just analyze an application that's already been deployed. This may be the application developer themselves saying, okay, I'm going to run one of these tools against my application that I've just built from the ground up, or what have you, to see if I've missed anything.
Right. Find it before the bad guys do, or before I put it in production, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, these are very good testing tools. You'll see a lot of the tools that we're going to view here today. You'll see a lot of these tools also show up on developer forums and developer websites. You'll see them mentioned as, hey, here's a framework that you can use to do an evaluation of your specific web app to make sure that there's no little nastiness hiding out there. And that's a great thing. So there is another purpose, to having these as well. So if you have a developer that you're going to be working with or consulting with at any point during this, these may be tools that you want to inform them about, so that's something that they can use as well to maybe improve and tweak their code before it gets to you as a pen tester. I mean, remember, the easiest place to address security is when you design a system and build it and start to build it. So it's better for them to catch it than you to catch it. You should be, if you catch stuff, it should be stuff that they missed it, but hopefully it's the ones that maybe they just didn't think of really high level stuff, and you catch those ones. You should be kind of a safety check to them. So yeah, you'll see a lot of these tools being used by developers. That's another little tricky component here.
Very good. So again, important that we understand the way this client-server relationship works, because as a pen tester, I want to make sure I'm thorough. I've got to make sure that I don't want to go in and just hit the web server and say, oh, everything looks good, when they had major vulnerabilities in one of the applications on the server or with that back-end system or something like that. So it is important that we understand the way the web server works, the way the applications interact with that server, the way that server and applications might interact with other servers that are storing that data. So next on our list, so we talk about that client-server relationship. When we talk about a web application and analyzing an application, what are we doing here, Sean?
When you analyze a web application, you really want to, once you know that client-server relationship, I would always kind of try to get a picture in your mind of what that environment looks like and what tiers you're dealing with. Now, you will be able to get some of that just by doing your earlier assessments. You'll be able to get a picture of that. Well, hopefully, you never know, but hopefully you're able to get a clear picture of how things are laid out. Once you've got that, then you can start seeing what components you actually have to go through and test. You can also start using some of the stuff we taught you, for example, in the CEH. You can use those things to see what file types exist up on the server, and that can tell you things about the technologies in play. That we're of course assuming by saying you can find it out, we're assuming that you're doing a black box type test, that you have zero knowledge. If you have a gray box or especially a white box situation, then heck, just ask and they're going to tell you. But if you don't have that, then you're going to have to find a way to locate that information. Fortunately, we got plenty of things that can help us out. make sure you get what the structure of the application is, what operating systems they're running and what that environment looks like wherever possible. Make sure you know the clients that could be accessing this, and versions of engines that might come into play on their side that are going to process scripts and all that. So there's those little things you got to bring together to see how they all play together and play nice. It can be a very, very confusing and convoluted environment. And remember, we have, you mentioned the two big ones, Mike. You mentioned IIS and Apache. We have another one out there that comes into play is Nginx, Nginx. That one is seen in a number of places as well. So, keep in mind that that's something else that might appear that you have to get knowledge on. So, yeah. Now, as far as the other web servers that are out there, just to kind of to give those things lip service out there. Yeah, I'm well aware that there's other web servers out there. I mean, it ain't the big three. There's other ones out there, but the reality is that more than likely you're just not going to run into them. The odds are stacked against you. You could, but more than likely you're not. So I would always have reference material available to look at for those big three. And then the other ones, look them up as needed. I mean, there are still people out there, believe it or not, that use Netscape servers and stuff like that. Those are still out there. Don't know why, but they're still out there. There's plenty of those old school ones that people are like, you can get it from me when you take it out of my cold dead hands. That type of attitude.
Especially if it's an internal server or something like that for an internal website, maybe I'm okay with using that. Probably not going to see it as much, out there in the public-facing area. But as Sean says, you wouldn't be surprised what people will do.
You shouldn't be surprised here. Not too often.
Not at this point, anyway. In our careers, we should understand that people are still running NT, people are still using AOL. All that good stuff. So, all right. So, Sean, we get a good idea about the client-server relationship between the web server, the applications, and then the client that's consuming that information. Talk a little bit about analyzing a web application. I know there's a bunch of tools that we're going to go more in depth on in just a little bit. But start us off with, give us a hint or an idea of some of the tools we might be using to do this web application analysis.
Yes, we have. This is one of the areas that we have a lot of duplicate tools or tools that do somewhat duplicate functionality. We also have a lot of new ones here in Kaylee as well. We have ones that are what they typically call testing frameworks or assessment frameworks. Those are something that you see a lot of. Typically, those frameworks are ones that you can plug modules into, and they can do various scans. And this is also, by the way, one of these areas, just to kind of why we're talking about it, is this is one of the areas in Kaylee that you see both command line and GUI based stuff, but you actually see more GUI based stuff than you do command line. So at least with most of the major tools, when you start drilling into some of the other ones, it starts to change a bit. But you do see a good number of GUI based tools, just because it does make it a lot easier to use, not just for the fact that, hey, maybe you came over to Windows and here over to Kaylee. It's just because the information you're providing, the best way to do it is going to be through a GUI. If you try to provide the stuff with the command line, no, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to do it. So you can do that. You can do that with some of these tools, but we do have a lot of GUI based ones that can help us out. So we are going to take a look at several of them. We have ones like W3AF. We have ones like I got a kind of a short list. Vega, OWASP. We have the Burp Suite, which we have seen a little bit of before. We're going to take a look at that, and then we have other things that you may not associate with testing a web application, but they do play a role there too, or things like OpenVAS, which is a vulnerability scanner. That would indeed be useful here too. So we have at the very least a good number of tools just right there. But yeah, there's plenty of other ones. There's plenty of other ones out there, and more than likely you're going to see that this is going to be an area where you're going to have to do quite a bit of assessment, because it's important to remember that a web server is one of those things that does act as a very easy entry point into an organization. So you may not just be targeting a specific IP out there and using it as an entry point. In general, you're using a web server as a place where you can scan it, see user accounts on there, maybe bust a password, or those types of things, and use that to get in. And then we've seen stuff like like browsing out of the home folder or the web folder onto the system by doing directory traversals and stuff like that. We can do those types of things to get out of there and start doing other stuff to plant things in the system, to do manipulation of user accounts and stuff like that, to bring stuff onto that system. And now what do? We can start opening up that hole more and more and more and more to the point where we can get a lot of nastiness in there and really open up the network. So this may be the place where the person kind of gets their foot in the door to do further damage. So that's another big reason why you want to use everything at your disposal in this area to really make sure you got your bases covered. This is where people go.
Yeah, I would think that as a pen tester, I've got to be able to put a web server through its paces. By its nature, it usually needs some level of public or anonymous access, because we want the general public to be able to come to our web server and browse our web page and find out about our company or buy our products or whatever it is we're putting that web server up. So it's got some level of anonymous access. It's not like my file server that I can lock behind those firewalls, or my domain controller that I feel is safe back there behind 2 layers of firewalls, right? That web server's sitting out there, so as the bad guys, that's what they're going to be hitting. That's their first thing they see. It's the easiest thing to access. That's usually their starting point. So as a pen tester, we've got to test that thoroughly, and that means, as you said, knowing all the different tools, knowing all the different ways to analyze it, being familiar with even those off-the-wall web browsers, Netscape, or not web browsers, but web servers that might be out there, so that we can, again, do a thorough job in our penetration test.
Yep.
All right, well, lots of tools and stuff that we're going to take a look at, but Sean, looking at the clock, we're about out of time for this episode, so anything else we want to throw in just on the concepts of web servers and server application type thing?
Well, the things that come to mind here are, if you're really going to get the most bang for your buck out of looking at testing web applications and using these tools, do familiarize yourself with, at the very least, IIS and Apache. Kind of take a look at how the different modules are laid out and what type of features they have, and so you know what makes one different from the other, and different mechanics underneath the hood. I don't necessarily need you just going in raw to this to be someone that is going to become an expert, and brush up on those things so they really know every nook and cranny. Of course not. But I would expect you to get the most information out of these things. One of the things you need to know is understand at least those 2 web servers. And then we go on to talk about the web applications. The web applications, to really get the most bang for the buck out of a lot of these, you're going to have more intimate knowledge of a specific web application. So for today, with what we're doing, we don't really care if you've got that knowledge going in with a web application. At least web servers, I would expect most of you already have a good knowledge of web servers and how they work. You may have to fill in some holes here and there, but you at least have a good working knowledge. The web application, we're just going to say, okay, generically, a web application is something that processes stuff out there. But if you're going to be going to an environment and pen test, before you pen test with that web app, you're probably going to take a closer look at what it's expected to do, common issues with it. That's if it's something that's off the shelf. If it's something that's off the shelf that someone has implemented in their environment, then yeah, go to the vendor and figure out what they're doing. If it's something that it's homegrown, that's a different story. You may actually have to view the different component technologies that they use to weave together to make that solution, and then go from there. And that could be a little bit of a taller order. In fact, it might be something that you just have to enlist a developer themselves to help you out with, and don't be afraid to do that. If you need to do a thorough job, which you should always be striving to do. If you need a developer to sit with or talk to, don't make the stuff up yourself and just guess at it. Get them to do it, to work with you to kind of help you fill in those gaps. But fortunately, most of the time you'll be able to at least get a good amount of information even without going to that. But at some point, you should really seriously consider to do the best possible job you can, do you need a developer to come in and really help you out. But this product will help you to a certain degree with that, or I should say the tools that this product has in it, Kaylee, a lot of them will help you out with that stuff. They'll tell you, hey, I found these things, and you can just go ahead when you know what the name of that thing is and know what the name of a specific issue is. You can use that to say, okay, I know that that's a nasty one. I know at high level what that means, and I have evidence of it appearing. I can turn that over. That might be enough to take to your client and say, yeah, I found evidence of cross-site scripting happening here. They're the ones that are going to have to take care of it in their end and really understand what's causing it, but you at least were able to find it by virtue of having these tools. So do remember that. So for right now, don't sweat that sort of stuff, but that is something that you should have on your plate as as kind of a review item. If you're going to be doing this, which you will.
Very good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for this particular episode. We want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure you stay tuned. We got more Kali episodes coming your way. But for now, signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Mike Roderick.
And I'm Sean Ariano.
And we'll see you next time.